Hello friends! Welcome to Daily Sourdough. Today we are making sandwich bread that can be made in one day. It still has an 8 to 10 hour ferment, so you get a good long fermentation, but you can have this bread ready by evening if you begin in the morning. This is a great recipe. Love this recipe. It makes 2 very large loaves. So it's a real good one to have on hand. Start out with 3 cups of water, and this is tepid water, a little bit on the warm side. This helps activate the yeast and the microbiotics, the little microbes in your starter, gets it started. To your warm water, add 1 and a little bit over a cup of starter. This is probably 1 1/4 cup starter, and make sure it's very active. I fed this last night so that it would be ready this morning, and it's good and bubbly. Then just stir that up a bit. Let your starter dissolve in that warm water. Give those little microbes a nice warm bath. They'll feel so good and be ready to grow. Once that starter has softened and dissolved in your water, add to that a 1/4 cup of oil. And I'm using avocado oil because it has such a mild flavor. It's definitely my oil of preference. And then add about 2 tablespoons of honey. You can also use sugar. I just want to use honey because honey has wonderful enzymes and health properties to add to my bread. Then just take a few minutes and let all of that dissolve in your warm water. Next, add 3 teaspoons of a good sea salt, and then 6 cups of bread flour. And it really is best to use bread flour because it has a higher protein content and it will yield a better loaf. So just dump all of it in. This is a really easy recipe. There's just not much fussing going on in this one at all. I'll just use my spatula to get that flour and water mixed up. It's going to be a very wet dough to begin with. And that wet, sticky dough is going to allow for a lot of expansion when it's baking. Makes a very nice large loaf, 2 of them in fact. Now that it's mostly mixed in, use your hand. Get in there. You're gonna get dirty, but it is gonna help those microbes really get active with the warmth of your hand, and give it a little massage. Make sure that you mix it long enough to get all that flour mixed in. So it will take a few minutes. Just squeeze it. Massage all that dough, all that flour into your starter and your water. You don't want any little bits of dry flour. Just keep going around and around. Some people ask me, why do you not use a kitchen scale to measure your ingredients with? And sometimes I do, but I've made enough bread to know kind of how it's supposed to feel. And I think back to my ancestors who had large families and they were making bread every day for their families. They didn't have a kitchen scale. And so I want to be like that. I want to be able to just feel the dough and know what it needs. You can tell by just the texture of it how it's going to behave. Is it going to rise high? Is it going to be too dense? What does it need? That's why I like to do things just kind of by eyeballing it, not with exact measurements. But If you prefer measuring exactly with a kitchen scale, then please do that. And it will teach you a lot by measuring it and then feeling the dough. You'll learn a lot that way. And then over time, you'll just know exactly what your dough needs. Okay, it feels like it is completely mixed, and as you can tell, it's a very sticky dough. It is time for its rest period, so we're going to cover the dough and let it rest on the counter for about 30 minutes, and then we will begin our first stretch and fold. We're ready for our first stretch and fold, so just take your hand, reach way under the dough, lift it up and fold it over. And I have a bowl of water sitting here so that you can see how sticky it is. I'm going to dip my hand in the water so that it's a little easier to manage. And do 2 to 3 rounds of stretch and fold on this first one. So just keep going round and round. And as you do it, you can see the texture of your dough, the consistency of it really change. It starts to tighten up the gluten. Starts to really take shape. Just reach way under the dough, grab a handful of it, and fold it over itself and tuck it in. Okay, now cover it once again, let it rest for another 30 minutes, and then we'll do a second stretch and fold. It's been another 30 minutes, time for our second stretch and fold. So once again, just reach down deep under the dough, pull it up, fold it over itself. Since it's still very wet, you can dip your hand in the water. Now, if it's really unmanageable, then dip your hand in some flour. But we'll see how this one turns out, and then we'll decide if we need flour or water next stretch and fold. But you can see that the dough is really smoothing out. It's getting much stretchier. So we'll do a couple of rounds of stretch and fold with this one. You can see the dough is already taking shape. It's very nice, very soft dough. Okay, now we'll cover it and let it rest another 30 minutes. Then we'll do our third stretch and fold. Time for our third stretch and fold. Since it feels like it's still a bit too sticky, I'm going to dip my hands in flour this time, just to bring a little more structure to the bread. You can see though that the dough is getting very smooth. Cover that, and after another 30 minutes we'll do our last stretch and fold. It's time for our last stretch and fold. We'll see how the dough's coming along. Okay, it's definitely developed more gluten structure now, still on the wet side, but it has a lot more stretch to it. It's really important to do all 4 stretch and folds and give it 30 minutes or even a little bit longer in between. Doesn't have to be exact, but that really does help to develop the gluten structure so that the bread will have shape to it. And now I'm going to put it in this bigger bowl because I think it's going to really expand. Now it's time for the first rise, so cover your dough and let it rest in a warm place for about 6 hours. I set my dough in a very warm place, and after 6 hours, it has really risen. So I'm going to poke a floured finger into the dough, and it is definitely ready to shape. So flour, just a little bit of flour on your countertop, and then place this on a countertop. Still a bit sticky dough, but look at that. So beautiful. Don't you just love to pat it? It's so fun to touch. And I'm gonna divide this in half, and you can see it's gonna make some big loaves. So just lightly flour down the center of your dough and then cut it in half. Oh, it's so full of life and air, and man, it's gonna be light and fluffy dough, fluffy bread. Set that over there. I'm gonna deflate this a little bit because I don't want pockets of air in my cooked bread. Then I'll have holes in my bread. And then to shape the loaf, take 1/3 of your dough and fold it towards you. Put it in the center, kind of press it down so that it sticks. Still have lots of air in there. Then take the side closest to you and fold it completely over the other third so that it's like an envelope. Then seal the ends and to make your loaf really nice and taut, take each side and pull it into the center like this and then press it down. So you're just kind of bringing each side in to really tighten that loaf up, and that creates more tension on the underside of your loaf, which is going to be the top, and also deflates some of those bubbles once again. I'm really excited because I have new loaf pans. After 35 years of making bread, I finally bought these loaf pans that are a 1-pound loaf pan. This sandwich style, fits in your toaster better, so I'm very excited. And I lightly buttered it, just a tiny bit of flour inside, and then I'll put this big fatty in there. Then do the same thing with your other half. And if you want, you can cut this into 4 loaves. Just make 4 smaller loaves, which that's wonderful too. Fold it like an envelope. Press out the bubbles. This is one happy loaf. And pinch the ends to seal them. Fold the sides in again, kind of stitching it together in the center. It almost looks like a braided loaf when you're done, but that's the underside. This recipe is a really great example of how a wetter dough rises better. I mean, this is just so full of life. It is, it's almost too light and airy. And then tuck it in tight, and now cover your loaves, and I'm going to cover it with a shower cap because I don't want the dough touching the plastic, and then it will stick to it, and sometimes that causes it to deflate. So cover it with a shower cap and let it rest another hour or 2. You want the dough to rise up to the surface of the pan, and even over a little bit is great. But by the time it's done rising another 1 to 2 hours, that will be a total of 9 to 10 hours of fermentation. So great recipe if you want to make your sandwich dough in one day. The dough has been rising for about an hour and a half, and I am ready to bake it. Have your oven preheated to 400 degrees, and we'll pop them in the oven and bake them for about 35 minutes, just until they're golden brown and they test done. Look at these beautiful loaves of bread. I'm really loving this pan. I love the shape of it. You've got perfect size to fit in your toaster. It's a great size to make a nice big sandwich, so it's really a fun sized bread. And be sure and butter the tops when they come out, makes it even more delicious. And let me know what you think about this bread recipe. Give it a try, see how it turns out for you. Be sure to err on the wet side when you're making bread, because dense, heavy dough will yield a very dense, heavy loaf, and you want a nice, soft loaf of bread. You can see that this is soft, hot to touch, but there's a lot of give in it. It's going to be a nice loaf inside. And friends, be sure to stay tuned because I have so many more recipes to share with you. I'm really excited to share even more about how to use your sourdough on a daily basis.